afternoon. Do you have a motion to approve the minutes? I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed is nay. Thank you very much. All right, Madam Clerk, let's jump right in. We got ordinances first read.
An ordinance amending Chattanooga City Code, Chapter 26, Article 3, Section 2656, 2657, and 2658 relating to Miller Park.
All right, this is an item we discussed at 1:30. I'm not seeing any further questions at this time. So let's move on to 7A, please.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a lease agreement with the Helen Ross McNabb Center in substantially the form attached for 120 square feet of office space in a portion of the Family Justice Center at 5705 Upton Road, identified as tax parcel number 157MA012, for a term of 2 years with the option to renew for an additional term of 2 years in the amount of $2,640 per term.
Councilwoman Burrs.
Yes, Mr. Chair. A through F are all the leases with the Family Justice Center. Those are all the agencies that are in the Family Justice Center. There's someone here to answer questions if we have them, but they're pretty much run-of-the-mill.
And I believe these are all extensions, 2-year extensions.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Well, in that case, does anybody have any of the questions for these items on the council?
The leases are low. The services are delivered there free. So any questions we can answer.
I'm not seeing any.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Councilwoman. We have no departmental reports, which makes my portion of this meeting really quick. That is the end of our regular agenda. We're going to move into Public Works and Transportation Committee with Chairman Mitchell.
Anybody want to help me approve the minutes of the last meeting? Have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Looks like we've got some ordinances and resolutions in Public Works to start with. Hey, Justin. Would you please read 6B?
An ordinance closing and abandoning a sewer easement located at 5565 Cassandra Smith as detailed on the attached map, subject to certain conditions.
See no questions? Okay, but how about C, please?
An ordinance closing and abandoning a sewer easement located at 5424 Cassandra Smith as detailed on the attached map, subject to certain conditions.
All right, very good. Let's move on to resolutions then. 7G, please.
A resolution authorizing the approval of change order number 1 for Progressive Maritime Services LLC of Hickson, Tennessee, contract number R16008201, Ross Landing Water Cannon Pump Reinstallation for an increase in the amount of $30,000 for a revised contract amount not to exceed $50,500.
I see no, yes, Councilman Henderson.
Hey, Justin.
Yes, sir.
This seemed to increase quite a bit. Did we do some redesigning and come up with something different here, or what?
So this did require quite a bit of underwater work and inspections and investigations by an underwater construction team who had to install a pump. After the construction and completion of the riverfront along Ross's Landing, where we firmed up the hard edge of Ross's Landing Park, there was found to be a leak in a pump that supplied the water for the water cannons adjacent to the Market Street Bridge. So we began that repair and investigation about 1.5 years ago. We tried several attempts at lower cost solutions, ended up having to replace the pump. The pump that we replaced at some point, we determined that the flange had to be replaced as well, so there's just a significant amount of additional work that went into trying to select the right equipment to replace an old pump that was a submersible pump and or a dry pump in a wet, and replacing that with a wet well pump. So we've done a significant amount of work, and the change order is significant, but we felt like it was a valuable piece of installation along the riverfront, and we tried to do everything we could to get that running again.
Aren't they, I mean, they are running again, aren't they? Aren't
They are
up
as of
and
last
running?
week. So they've been down over a year and a half, maybe a little bit longer. And they came on for just a short period of time after the hard edge was repaired. They were functional, and then they went down again, and we were just able to get them back up and running last week. So thankful for that, but it did come with a bit of a price tag. There's a lot of underwater investigations that were very difficult to find. It was a challenging project, to say the least.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. No other questions? Please read 7H.
A resolution authorizing the administrator for the Department of Public Works to enter into an agreement for grant administration services with Southeast Tennessee Development District for technical and professional administrative services for 5 city projects financed through Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund for a total project cost not to exceed $41,500.
Okay, we had a little bit of this conversation earlier. See no lights? No questions? Okay. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, council.
Okay, we're now moving to transportation. Would you please read 7I?
A resolution authorizing the Chattanooga Area Regional Transportation Authority to apply for a congestion mitigation and air quality improvement grant from the Tennessee Department of Transportation for expansion of CARTA's electric bus fleet, with the city's portion not to exceed $650,000 for an amount not to exceed $3,250,000.
I don't see any questions, but we have some folks here from CARTA. Anybody want to say anything?
Good afternoon, Council. Is this on? I can't
Hi
tell if
there.
it's on. How are you today?
Very
Thank you
well.
for this. I appreciate this. This is an opportunity for us to replace some of our vehicles. We have about 28 vehicles that are past their useful life out of 49 in our fleet. We've applied to replace those 28 vehicles with diesel vehicles through FTA. And what this grant does is this grant applies for the difference between a diesel vehicle and an electric vehicle. So we'd like to replace those vehicles with electric vehicles instead of diesel. So the CMAQ grant will allow us to purchase the electric vehicles. So this will cover the difference in price between those two. And the city portion would be, it's an 80-20 grant, so it'd be about $650,000. But we're also working with EPB to do some creative financing to try to get them to look at it and invest in the electric vehicle programs. We're trying to expand. These vehicles will be for our fixed rail buses. These will not be for the downtown shuttle. So we currently have 3 BYD all-electric vehicles that are in place now. We'll be probably putting those out on the road probably within the next month. We're doing some testing now with those, and those vehicles are inductive charging, which is in the ground charging, not above ground charging. The station for the opportunity charging is located inside our Shuttle Park South garage, so the vehicles will just pull over this little pad, and it can charge for as long as we needed to, whether it's 1, 2, 3 minutes, just to keep the battery life going all day, and then at night they'll be plugged in so that they'll get a full charge at night. So we're trying to replace all of our diesels with these type of vehicles. And that's what this grant will do. So in the partnership with EPB is another way for a look at us to get local funding without having to always come to the city. So they've been a great partner, and we're still working through some of those details.
Councilman Ledford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lisa, I do want to thank you for having a conversation with me late last week. As I expressed a few questions concerning, can you tell us what the difference is, the cost between a diesel version and the electric version?
There's a $250,000 price difference between the diesel and the electric. And then on the maintenance side of things, and obviously on the fuel side of things, there's a savings there because we will not have any diesel fuel. And diesel fuel currently is about we pay about $1.85 a gallon for diesel. We have a contract for that. And then the kilowatts would probably be about 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So it'll probably be an average of right now we pay about $17,600 in diesel fuel per vehicle. If they go over the 40,000 miles a year, and it'll probably be about $8,000 for the electric vehicles. Again, this is all assumption because we're still testing, and with our hilly terrain, that may make a little bit of a difference in some of our efficiencies on that, but that's what we're going to be testing to see how long how much we can get out of it. We should get about 120 miles a charge out of our electric vehicles.
Great. We talked a little bit too about keeping some diesels, correct?
Currently, because we have so many to replace, the funding level hasn't been there for quite some time through the federal government, and right now we have an opportunity to replace, like I said, 13 of the 28 that are aging. We have about 20 vehicles that are 20 years old. So, I mean, they have 600,000 miles plus on them. Our maintenance team has done a great job keeping those going, but it's time for those to be replaced. So the goal is to obviously not have diesel vehicles, but we have to do some replacement of the vehicles because they're way beyond their useful life, which is 12 years through the FTA.
Okay, last question, Mr. Chair.
Mhm.
So that be remiss if I didn't ask the process when we dispose of or get rid of the old buses. Does that money, do we sell them? What happens to them?
We have a site called the public auction, and that's where we'll list the vehicles, all the vehicles that we sell. And depending on the dollar amount that we get, those will go back into either buying more replacement vehicles or back into the operating costs. And we can sell them for up to $5,000. Anything $5,000 or over, we have to revert back and give back to the federal government.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Very good. Thank you, Lisa. Thank
And
you,
we'll,
Mr. Chair.
I sent a picture to Councilman Ledford of our new electric vehicles. They're really nice and they're very quiet, and you'll be very impressed with them. So once they're all ready to go out, I'd love to take you all for a ride, just so you can see what they're like and the main difference in them. You can't hear them at all, and they're a great vehicle. So that's what we're going to try to gear towards. We have funding for 3 more currently, in addition to these. So hopefully we can keep going in that direction. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Anything else? Now that she's sitting down? If not, we're going to join Public Works and Transportation and go right into Planning and Zoning. Thanks.
He's not tired, he's ready to go. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Planning and Zoning Committee meeting. May I get a minutes approved, please? All right, thank you very much. Let's be a little more exciting. This is our fun part of the day. John, I know we have an ADU presentation today, but I just want to look over item 5A under planning, which we've already read in first reading. So if there aren't any questions from the council on that item, I'm going to go ahead and move into John's presentation on ADUs.
Sure.
And then we'll pick up the resolution or the ordinances for next week after that.
Thank you for your indulgence. I'm going to be very brief. This is a presentation is a follow-up. As you recall, about 3 months ago, we did a presentation on potentially modifying the RTZ zone to allow ADUs, and you all asked us to look for maybe a different approach pattern after short-term vacation rentals, and staff has done a lot of work in putting some ideas together, and I'm going to turn it over to them. Emily Wood from our office is going to give you an overview of our research and recommendations after a short video. And then at the end of that, we'll be asking for your direction or basically affirmation to proceed ahead with the developing of the tool. So just want to give you an overview before we move forward with that next step. Emily?
Good afternoon, Emily.
Hi, Council. Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Hope you're all doing well. So, I just wanted to show a short video of that Asheville made now that they allow ADUs that will hopefully give the council some ideas on the variability and the many ways that ADUs can be used throughout a city. And then from there, I'll go into a little more background on ADUs and then staff's proposal.
There's something new happening all across the country. People are building ADUs, and lots of them. Accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, are additional separate living units on residential lots that help to meet community housing needs and to provide extra income for homeowners. For example, Joe and Amy live in a beautiful old house, which has supported their many hobbies. When kids entered the picture, they remodeled their upstairs, added a bathroom, and retired some of their more exotic hobbies, like beekeeping. Joe and Amy's lives and priorities have changed. They wanted to start a fund for their kids' college, start saving for retirement, and both had aging parents they wanted to be close to, but not too close. A friend suggested they build an ADU on their property. Joe and Amy were intrigued and found out they could build a legal ADU in the basement, attic, garage, above the garage, or as a freestanding cottage in the backyard. Joe and Amy realized this was a smart way to invest and have the flexibility to house one of their parents in the future. They decided to convert the garage. After construction was complete, the ADU rented for $850 per month. A few years later, when most of the construction costs were recouped through the rental income, Joe's mother moved into the unit. Joe and Amy's neighbor, Rosa, had witnessed how useful the ADU was over the years, so she began to consider building one as well. Rosa was about to retire and was looking for a way to reduce her living expenses so she could travel more with her dog Baxter. She worked with an architect to make the best use of her space and chose a detached backyard ADU designed just for her. She built it small because she knew that small homes are less expensive to build and maintain, use very little energy, and can be quite charming. Rosa moved into her new ADU and rented out her main house. The rental added needed long-term housing to the community, and the income not only covered the cost of her mortgage, but also began to offset the cost of her ADU construction. When Rosa's cousin Daryl heard about this, he decided to build one himself. Since he spends a good deal of his time away from home, he wanted to supplement his income by renting out his basement. Daryl is a real do-it-yourselfer and tackled most of the basement remodel on his own. Nice job, Daryl. There are so many creative ways to integrate an ADU into your property that can meet the needs of both you and your community. Which is right for you? Take the first step and visit ashevillennc.gov/ADU.
Okay, you could go to this PowerPoint slide now, please. So I just wanted to show that because I thought it was cute and I thought it just showed some of the versatility of ADUs. I'm just going to go into a little bit of the history of ADUs because they actually have been around since the late 19th century. They were an older historic housing type. We have many in some of our historic neighborhoods in Chattanooga. But then around the 1950s, with the growth of suburbs and people moving outside away from the city centers and with the enactment of new zoning laws, a lot of the new zoning laws in the 50s prohibited ADUs because they wanted to allow for just one single family home on a lot. And so a lot of the ADUs are coming back in popularity now as a way to supplement income or as a way to provide different housing types for people that may not want to be able to afford living in a single family home and may also not want to live in a large apartment complex. So between the 1990s to the present, cities have started adopting ADUs again. And just as a reminder, Chattanooga has adopted ADUs just in our form-based code boundary area in 2016. And currently, I believe there has approximately been 6 that have been constructed. The video also pointed out lots of advantages of ADUs for homeowners, as you can see on the slide there. There's also some advantages for the city with conserving land by developing on already built-out lots instead of building on greenfield. It could potentially increase tax revenue, and it can also increase the housing supply. I wanted to point out some of the land use plans that have been adopted by the city throughout the years. There are 3 in particular that actually suggest allowing ADUs. The St. Elmo, the MLK, and the South Broad plans all recommend revising zoning regulations to allow ADUs in these urban neighborhoods. And I wanted to bring this to your attention because the land use plans went through an extensive public planning process, and the public expressed a desire for this housing type in their neighborhoods. And now, here's some examples of a few ADUs in Chattanooga just to give you an idea of what we already have. On the left here, I don't know if this will work. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but the left is an ADU on the South Side Village down off, on South Side off Main Street. They built an ADU above the garage. It's accessed off of a rear alley. And then the picture to the right, which is unfortunately upside down, is the primary dwelling unit in front of the detached garage and ADU, which fronts Jefferson Street. And this is one that was permitted under the current form-based code regulations. Here's an aerial showing where the red icon is the primary dwelling in the front off Jefferson with the detached garage and ADU off the rear alley. This is an example of a legal non-conforming ADU. This particular house and secondary structure was built in the early 1900s prior to our zoning regulations, so it's been operating as an accessory dwelling unit since that time. It's also accessed off of a rear alley, and then the primary dwelling is in front of it off of Lytle Street in the North Shore. So this is sort of going back to how I mentioned the history of ADUs. They have been around for quite some time, and we have some of those here in the city. Here is an aerial, again, showing the primary dwelling unit fronting Lytle with the ADU in the back off of JD Lane. And one more non-conforming historic ADU in St. Elmo. On the left is the primary dwelling unit fronting St. Elmo Avenue. And then on the right is the accessory dwelling unit in the back off of Tennessee Avenue. And just another aerial showing the site plan and the layout. So now that I've just kind of briefly discussed what ADUs are, how they can be used, I wanted to go into staff's proposal. This first map I wanted to show you because originally, as John mentioned, staff had suggested allowing ADUs this spring in the RTZ zone within the urban overlay, and I know there was concern about just allowing them in the RTZ zone because of the potential of spot zoning. But staff's newest proposal is also including the urban overlay, so I wanted to show this map just as a reference. So the yellow is the urban overlay boundary, the red is the form-based code boundary, the blue are some of the designated historic neighborhoods, such as St. Elmo and Fort Wood, that are in the urban overlay. The black hatching is the short-term vacation rental boundary, just for reference, and then lastly, the green shows the different council districts in relationship to all of these different areas. The urban overlay is located in council districts 2, 7, 8, and 9, in case you had questions about that. This is just more of another map showing the boundary that the urban overlay is generally bounded to Missionary Ridge on the east, the state line to the south, Lookout Mountain to the west, and North Chattanooga to the north. And then one more map for reference. This just shows the neighborhoods that are within the urban overlay, excluding form-based code in red, the bright red. There's about 29 neighborhoods that fall within the urban overlay. So this is sort of the general area that staff is proposing for ADUs. And so our proposal would be to allow ADUs by right in all residential zones within that urban overlay boundary. And we chose the urban overlay for several reasons. One, because the urban overlay is located just outside form-based code where the ADUs are already permitted in the city. It seemed like the logical next expansion of ADUs into some of our sort of urban edge neighborhoods. Also, the urban overlay has already been established through a public process when it was adopted, and the intent of the urban overlay supports infill housing like ADUs. And then lastly, properties within the urban overlay are typically on a grid street system and have rear alley access, as you saw in some of the examples that I've shown, which is sort of been the historic form of having a detached ADU or a single-family home in some of our urban neighborhoods. So those are some of the reasons why we chose the urban overlay as sort of our pilot area. And then by allowing ADUs in all residential zones instead of just the RTZ, it will ensure more consistency and prohibit the potential of spot zoning for future zoning requests. And lastly, by allowing an ADU by right, can help speed up the review process while maintaining certain standards to ensure compatibility with the neighborhood. And so staff envisions, similar to the form-based code, that there will be strict standards in a site plan review process, which would then allow the construction process to be more efficient and affordable for both the homeowner and city staff. But then we can also make sure that the standards help guide the certain standards like the location of the ADU on the lot, the scale and mass of the building height, the setbacks and parking. All those are already regulated in the form-based code. I showed some examples on the slide there. So staff envisions there being similar standards so that we can have some protection and keep that compatibility with the design of the neighborhood. And staff is suggesting that we try out this pilot ADU boundary for 1 year, similar to form-based code, and then coming back to council with an evaluation to where we can determine if the boundary should be changed, expanded, or shrunk back down, or if the standards need revised, or if there's any other issues that have come up during this 1 year pilot. And so, to summarize, staff is essentially suggesting that council consider a housing type that was once the predominant form found in our urban neighborhoods in Chattanooga, and to develop standards to make sure that this housing type is compatible with the current form in place. So I'm asking the council if they would like to direct the RPA to proceed with amending the zoning regulations in the urban overlay to permit accessory dwelling units in the residential zones. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Very
Thank you.
good, because as I anticipated, we do have several. I think I have Councilman Mitchell up first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you go back a few slides to the urban overlay map?
Which
That
which
right
one?
there, yeah.
This one?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to look at it for a second. Okay, thank you.
Are you good, Councilman?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I have Dr. Burris.
Technical, just two technical questions. This at this point doesn't involve my district, but if I do if I build something within my house, doesn't that make it a duplex?
It would depend on how the regulations are written. There's a few options that staff would bring forward to council if they're supportive of us examining this further.
Let me tell you why I'm asking that, because in some areas, we worked hard to downzone the areas to R1. I believe that if you take an R1 house and build another house in it, have you not effectively made it a duplex?
Potentially.
And just something to think about.
Let me respond, if I could respond. Today, you can build an ADU, 2 units, 1 lot, with a attached breezeway. So throughout the city of Chattanooga today, in an R1 zone, if I have a detached structure, looking at Phil for
With the
confirmation.
breezeway,
With the breezeway,
it's cool.
2
I got
units.
that.
So
In fact, we have one in our neighborhood. No, I have 2 questions.
so yeah,
If I build one inside an existing structure, is that in effect a duplex?
in a sense, you have 2 households, or 2 people live, it's very similar to a duplex, yes. in that
It's a
sense.
duplex, okay. The second one is, if I take a lot that there's a house already on, and I build another structure on it, am I not effectively having 2 lots, 2 structures? Am I not downgrading the size of the lots in the neighborhood? Because it's not the same family. It's like I've really divided a lot in 2. I'm just thinking, have you thought about these things? Because you could get into some complications.
Yes, there's complications, but as we all know, the housing market's changing, and what we're seeing is that more folks have their family living with them. And so what we're seeing is, and I think as you know, reference, there's a lot of other cities that are doing this as a way to provide more folks more housing options.
Yeah, I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, there may be some unintended consequences, and just you might want to think about that.
But that's where the standards come in. I think, just to be clear, when you ask us to develop this tool, the work, the next step is to actually develop the standards. We realize there needs to be standards. So for example, adequate parking, making sure that you're not overbuilding on a lot. All those things are accomplished through standards that regulate how you do that on your property.
And I'll also just add that by doing the 1 year or 6 months or whatever timeline we choose pilot, you know, that will give us a time to then evaluate to see what is or is not working, and then similar to what we did in form-based code, because as we've seen, some of the standards that we originally envisioned didn't quite work out, and so we had to come back and make changes. So I think that this will be an evolving process as well, so that we can make sure that we get it right and that we meet the needs of the community and also meet the concerns of the community for those that may have concerns.
Thank you. I think very often we deal with problems, but we don't deal with unintended consequences. So I was just bringing those to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Burrs. Councilman Henderson, I see your light is next, sir.
Thank you. Emily, can you go back to the form-based code specs? Okay, right there. And I guess, well, it talks more about building placement. Is there something that addresses how large the accessory dwelling unit can be relative to the primary unit?
Yes, that is something that staff will definitely look at when we come forward with more specific standards. Form-based code currently restricts the size to 700 square feet. And so I would think staff would probably do something similar to ensure that it is actually a smaller secondary unit and not 2 single-family homes on one lot, as Councilwoman Burrs just mentioned. So we likely would include size of ADU, where it's located, building height, because I wouldn't think that we would want the ADU to be taller than the primary dwelling unit either. So those would be some of the things that we'll be looking at.
Okay. So currently, right now, an ADU can't be larger than 700 square feet.
And form-based code. Mhm.
Okay. My next question is, what was the staff's thinking on only allowing the ADUs in the urban overlay and not extending it to the whole short-term vacation rental district? Because I think one of the arguments is people's gonna have on the short-term vacation rental is, you know, why can't we build an ADU and rent it out since we're in the short-term vacation rental zone?
Originally, we thought urban overlay because that's where we've seen more of some of the historic ADUs already, and also with it being in more urban areas, they have kind of on that grid street system, which hopefully would not be as impactful to the traffic pattern of the street, because if they have rear alley access instead of having individual curb cuts. So if you have 2 ADUs and if somebody in a different area wanted to have, you know, 2 driveways, how does that affect the street system? And so, and because it's sort of the next extension outside of the form-based code, we were just, I guess, also being a little bit more restrictive because of the concerns that the council and the community may have. Opening it up to a larger area like the short-term vacation rental would just, it could work, but it could also just be a wider area where if we have a problem, it's more people dealing with the problem, I guess.
Well, I'm taking the word pilot to mean we're gonna test it in a small area and then I guess with anticipation of enlarging it anyway, correct?
That will be the hope, but if it's not successful or if there's, you know, concerns from the council when we reevaluate, then that's what we would look at. But the hope would be eventually to consider it in other areas.
I mean, I would like to hear from other council people that have the short-term vacation rental district in their district, about potentially enlarging this test pilot to include those, to include that whole district, short-term vacation rental district. Just a thought.
Good, Councilman? Yeah. Thank you very much. I do have some questions, but I'm going to let us run the dais here before I chip in. Councilman Byrd, you're next, please.
Thank you. Have we looked at traffic so often we having smaller lot sizes. I'm seeing, especially off Main Street, you have more than one house that you would assume that it would be one lot, but you have two houses on this one lot. And then when you get to the ADUs and you're putting houses behind other houses, in the perfect world, we would hope that everyone would ride their bike to work or walk and commute back and forth. But some older women or, gentlemen or even people that just don't choose to ride a bike, they're gonna come into Unum, to to Blue Cross Blue Shield or to the courthouse, and you're coming in to work, but it's becoming to get a gridlock almost because we're adding so much capacity, but it seems like we're not opening our streets up or widening the infrastructure of our traffic system, and it's like after a while it's gonna become a cluster, and people are gonna really be upset because you're not gonna be able to move. Have we thought about that or looked into anything like that as we're building these extra structures?
I think it has more to do with parking, not
Yeah,
so
that's a
much
problem.
traffic. Clearly having adequate site but and I'll look at Blythe for confirmation on this, the traffic generation from an ADU is not gonna be that much different than a house. I think the more has to do with adequate accommodation of parking on site. And I think, again, it depends on where you're located. Clearly, the more urban environment, if you're next to a transit route, folks will be using that. Clearly, those areas that aren't as served as well from transit may not be. So I think that's where it's a site review, individual case-by-case review. But clearly, one of the standards with this will be parking, because you have to make sure you have adequate accommodation of parking for the use. I hope that answers your question.
A little bit. It's just that just living in the community, I think it's off Jefferson Street. If you look at any ADU or anything that's over in that area, or just the housing, how the houses being built with the urban overlay, with the form-based code, how they're
Right.
coming up and close, it seems parking, I get it. In the alleyway, especially in Avondale, every house or every street has a alleyway behind it. So if we did access those alleyways, but you have houses there that just have one car, maybe two cars if you have a wife and a husband there, now you're getting ready to add another structure in hopes or in thinking that, hey, they're gonna catch the bus, hey, they're gonna walk to work or they're gonna get on there, but you're adding another car. or
Has to be
another
parked
vehicle
on site.
that's parked on site. So I can, even at my house, I can see the parking in the alley, and I can
Right.
even put a driveway attached to my property. I have a big enough footprint. But when that other car comes out on the street, right now it's hard enough to get in and out of the communities that's over there, because I live there. And now I'm seeing the growth of Chattanooga. And now even when we go to this, the ADUs, and people started to catch on because it's a moneymaker. If a
Right.
single family, I can make more money. I get it. And I want it, but it's just like, have we thought of anything to say, hey, we need to start working on these streets, because the streets are not getting any bigger, but our community is growing. And
I would
it's
say
like,
part of it, Councilman, also is making better use of our alleys.
uh-huh.
We have a lot of alleys, but probably they aren't being used
They're not.
as well. I think and that's why, again, I think, as Emily mentioned, you might want to focus on the urban overlay where you've got an alley system, because that's another way to move that suburban communities don't have. So I think it's another way of diverting traffic.
Okay.
So I think that's another key factor is having that infrastructure
Yes.
and making better use of it.
Please, thank you.
I also want to add, I think by limiting the size, that's also going to hopefully help with the number of extra vehicles, because, there likely can't be too many extra people with too many extra cars in a 700 square foot or smaller unit. There likely would be one or two more cars versus, a family of 5 that might have however many cars, or more than one family. That's the whole intent of it, is to be a much smaller unit that can be rented out, but it doesn't have to be. It could
Right.
be used for visiting family that may come once a month, or it could be a pool house that gets, converted in, or an office space that then gets converted into a place for visiting guests, or it could be a rental, short or long term, or it could be the in-law suite that it was once called, mother-in-law suite for aging parents. There's a lot of different ways for it to be used. So I think that the traffic and the parking is a valid concern, but depending how it's used, it may not be as impactful as we think, but until we test it out, we also won't know for sure. I haven't heard of any complaints from the form-based code, the 6 that have been permitted. I've spoken with the land development office, and as far as they know, they haven't received any complaints on added traffic from those 6, but it's only been built for about 2 years, so.
And that's the only thing that I just want to just bring to the attention is that definitely, but those words, that hope, most likely, probably, you know, and I went to Nashville and it was just, I couldn't move in Nashville. It was like I was stuck, and I was like, wow, they didn't think about this before they let all these people come and all this traffic. People are making money and the city is growing and the tax base is moving, but the people is very uncomfortable. And I think before we need to make sure we just look at that as a whole and just put it on the table. All right,
Thank you.
You good, Councilman? Yes, sir. Very good. Councilwoman Coonrod, I see your light.
Yes.
You are now active.
Thank you, Chair. To answer your question, Chip, you already know how I feel about it. I would love to have it extend. In fact, have the pilot in Eastdale because we don't ever get any pilots or anything launched in our community. And since we have a lack of housing, that's low-income housing, it's an opportunity for the seniors within my district to capitalize on this by renting out space or, fixing it up, having an ADU. And myself, personally, I would love to do it, just like I would love to do the short-term vacation rental, but I'm not in that footprint. But I would love, for others to have that opportunity. This is a great way to generate extra income for them, and then I wouldn't have to worry about or stress about my community changing if they no longer can afford their mortgage, and then they're being displaced at that point. So I would like for you all to look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Oglesby, you chimed in here.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. What would be the process of getting one added to your property?
Well, so I think first is we need to get the resolution and support from council for staff to move forward with looking at the standards and writing the ordinance to allow them. And then after that, if council is supportive of staff's idea, then it would just go through the normal building permit process, and they would go through the site plan review and submit their plans, and it would get reviewed during, the whole construction stage, is how we're anticipating it.
What about the community input part of it? Would it, with neighbors, just say, you may have some communities where you have a neighbor that may object to having that additional. That's kind of what Councilman Byrd was
Sure.
thinking.
So they're right now under form-based code, it is allowed by right in certain zones, and people just go in and apply for building permit, and then they get their ADU constructed. So staff was thinking something similar to that, but if the council feels that there needs to be an added public hearing or some other step for the areas outside of form-based code, we can look at that. But staff thought, after speaking with the development community, the homeowners community, and the planning commission informally, they thought that that was an added step and expense to the homeowner if they are trying to make it affordable. If they have to go through an added step and process and cost than what it already cost to build the ADU, it may not get used as often.
What kind of costs would they go through having community input into?
It would
What-
depend on if it's a special permit or if it went to a planning commission or city council. Typically, I think the special permit fees for, let's say, a planned unit development that comes in front of council, I believe is $150. Oh, $400. But those would all things that we would have to determine depending on the direction from the council. And then it likely may require additional time. Usually that's about a 3 to 4 month process to go in front of the council as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Are you good?
I'm good, sir.
Very good. Thank you very much. Anyone else have any questions before I chime in here? Very good. So Emily, I'm just curious, as Councilman Oglesby alluded to a minute ago, is the next step for us now, because I've got a whole page of questions that I feel like I could throw at you now, but I think it's a little premature. So what's the next step? You asked that we recommend that you move forward with creating a standards guideline for us, and then from that point, what happens?
And then we would bring you that more specific ordinance with the actual standards listed and our zones that we're recommending and sort of our process. And then you would then approve that ordinance, making that become the new zoning laws.
We will have an opportunity to all have, say, an input on the changes that you propose. I'm
Yes,
assuming.
certainly. We envision, we've already been in contact with the Land Development Office and CDOT and some other city staff, and then some neighborhood groups. We're going to be doing some public outreach. Brian and I will be meeting with the St. Elmo Neighborhood Association on September 10th, and then we're going to reach out to some other neighborhood associations as well and meet with the development community. But we didn't want to do that prematurely if we didn't have the support of the council. So we'll be going through more of that public process and then drafting the regulations, which we envision we'll share with the council, with planning commission, with these other communities or community groups. Get input from everybody, from other city staff as well, similar to what we did with form-based code, but I don't think that it will be as prescriptive as form-based code, but it will certainly still have strict standards. But things probably like transparency or location of doors, we may not get that specific, I don't know, but those would be all the sorts of things we would talk about once we have our draft regulations.
Very good. Will you anticipate putting in things that we don't see a lot right now? It's something that I'm wrestling with in my district, and that is things related to design standards, how things physically look, like requiring it to match the architecture of the existing home, similar colors, things that don't make it stand out as if out of place. Emergency, I'm looking at Chief Hyman back there, and fire access, emergency access, whether they're being used solely as rentals versus an aging parent for intended use. These are all things that are probably going to go into the pot for us to discuss at a later time. Okay, so I'm going to hold any more of those questions until, and I want to thank you for your work. I do have one more light. Councilman Henderson, you want to jump in before we?
Yeah, I just, I mean, if you were asking if I certainly would like to move forward with this, Emily, and if you'd like to come out to Lookout Valley Neighborhood Association, I'd be happy for you to do that as well. I mean, it's a pretty good neighborhood association to run something by. I would like for us to look at, maybe seriously think about extending this through the short-term vacation rental district as well.
Okay, but allowing by right as proposed?
Yeah, the by right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, we can certainly do
I think
that.
that's the way I would want to see this come down is have it by right.
Thank you, Councilman. Are you good? Thank you, sir. Councilwoman, may I interject one quick question before I go to you next? Speaking of, if we were to enlarge the area to the suggestion by Councilman Henderson, what role do you or your intended thoughts in regards to HOAs and in reference to their covenants and restrictions? Do you plan on trying to put in something that tries to override those, or will that fall straight into pretty much a short-term vacation rental category as well, which if it's not allowed, it's not allowed, if there's an HOA in
Yes,
place?
if there are specific HOA covenants that are more restrictive than what the zoning allows, then that would be a private matter between the HOA and the citizen to work out those, whether it's design standards or if they're allowed or not allowed. We won't be making changes to individual homeowners'
Okay. 'Cause
documents.
I know when we use words like by right, that gets a little sticky sometimes.
Yeah, by saying by right, that we mean allowing it as a permitted use in different residential zones under the zoning code, not making it have a special permit or some other use by review process.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. Councilwoman Coonrod?
Thank you, Chair. Emily, when you submit your proposal, can you also include a proposal for citywide?
Sure.
What that
Yeah.
looks like? Okay, thank you.
Very good. I'm seeing no other questions, Emily. Thank you for your hard work. John, thank you. Brian, you're back there. I see you. Raise your hand. There you go. Thank you for your hard work on this. It's something that we we had asked you to do, and we appreciate looking forward to the next step and talking about it further.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you. John, are we ready to move on?
Yes,
sir. To On to the next week's
Exciting stuff,
items?
zoning cases.
All right.
All right, y'all don't sigh on me now.
Kira, I'm not going to have Ms. Campbell read all of these because even though she was really asking for us to. So, John, can we start with ordinances on first reading 6A?
Sure. If we could have the screen come down, please. It is, and then maybe pull up that screen. It's for the, should say city councils for the September 11th meeting. It's a PDF. And while he's pulling that up, the first request that you see before you is a rezoning request from R2 residential zone to RTZ residential townhouse zero lot line zone to allow for a new townhouse development. The property is located at Beeson Drive, and just to give you a little bit of an orientation, Beeson is, if you're familiar with Pineville Road and US 27 and Signal Mountain Road, it's a ridge line that runs right along US 27. And I will give you some caution on this one as far as this, as you're making your thought, going through your thinking on this case. There'll be another follow-up case. There's a PUD that's coming up next month. So this area is getting ready to potentially change, and so just know that whatever decision you make on this case, it will probably have some bearing on the case the following month. Okay, oops, so the property is currently vacant. It is, if I move to the zoning, I think here you can see the site here. You can see it's pretty heavily wooded. It's a small, pretty narrow drive. Beeson Drive is a public road, but you can see it's pretty small and narrow. If you look at the zoning, that's not coming. Is there a way to do full screen on that view? That might get a little better. I see you got a Google Docs. There's no way to do full screen on that, I guess, is there? Okay.
Just pinch it.
Okay. Well, if you look, you can see the orange. That color is the R2 zoning. This whole area is blanket zoned R2. And just as a reminder, R2 allows you to do single family and duplexes. So it is zoned to accommodate potentially duplexes. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to move forward to the site plan. The site plan you see in the top of your screen there, it basically shows one curb cut coming off of Beeson Drive and accommodating 2 attached rows of townhomes, 5 on each side. And this is where I think staff, we wrestled a lot with this request, because normally you think going from R2 to RTZ, comparable or a down zone, but really it does represent a change in form, whereas in R2 you can do a 2-unit structure per lot, and that's all you can do. Here you're going to get 5 attached units on either side. So whereas currently you got a pretty low density residential development pattern on the street, a zone that's imagining some intensification of that, right, R2, and a request to RTZ, which is going to result in a townhouse type development with 5 attached units. So it does represent a pretty substantial change in the development pattern for this location. When looking at the comprehensive plan, there are some slopes on this site. Some of it is shown as a intensity level 1, which means very limited development is recommended, and some is level 5. And that's probably because it's so close to the US 27. But looking at essentially staff came down on the recommendation to deny. And really the primary reason was the combination of, one, it's still a predominantly single-family detached residential area. And the other concern was that once you approve this zone, you're looking at really changing development form from single-family detached to a townhouse-type development. And then, as I mentioned before, you are going to see another case come after this on a little bit larger piece of property. There was, at Planning Commission, no opposition to this request. And so Planning Commission, after hearing staff's presentation and the applicant's comments, determined that the use was appropriate for this area and recommended to approve. So you got 2 different recommendations, deny from staff and approve from Planning Commission.
Very good. Thank you, John. I do have Councilman Henderson up next.
So this was a little bit perplexing for me, with it being in my district. There's no opposition, and staff is recommending denial, and the planning commission is recommending approval.
Yep.
So what was the thought when they recommended, they always recommend with a reason?
Yep.
What was the reason that they gave? It's,
Basically, that they felt that the use was compatible with the adjacent land uses. They didn't see, I guess I would say, it's a substantial departure from the area. That's the best, sometimes they're more, verbalize it more. This, I would say there's not a lot that was shared in this situation. I would just, again, my word of caution is think about, let me go back to this zoning map. You're going to see another request. You see kind of like the semicircle up above it, and there's a long linear property, like a rectangle. Let's see if I can get this.
I don't know where you're talking about.
Whoop. See if I can guide you. Oop, going the wrong way. It's not helping us here. You see the property outlined in blue dashed, right?
Got it.
Top end of that corner, you see it looks like a elliptical alley that makes a dip.
Mm-hmm.
From that concave part of the alley going straight up north, including that rectilinear big parcel with one little house on it, there's going to be a PUD coming up. next.
In other words, all of that is still in the R2
Yep.
zone.
And
Are
so you
these-
can see the predominant pattern. I think here's what you need. It is a
this
tough.
Is this PUD a townhome PUD?
I want to say it's single family detached, small lot, right?
So what characteristics then have the two in common? When you say, if we,
Because of the, you know what? I mentioned, they're not doing RTZ, are they? I misspoke. It's just a PUD, I'm sorry. It's a PUD, not an RTZ request, so it is a different request. I will say, the connection is, it's small lot residential. So, and I think the question is, there's development interest in this area, clearly for infill. So the question is, what pattern, do we keep the pattern as it is, or do we change it to a new development pattern for this location? Clearly, this is in close proximity to downtown, right? So that would be an argument for changing the pattern, possibly intensifying it. I think the balancing factor, though, is you do have steep slopes in this area. And so if we're not careful, we could lose a lot of the tree cover along those ridges as this gets built out.
so let me ask you this. We're looking at steep slopes
Yep.
right now. Is this something that you would recommend deferring until we got the steep slopes policy hammered out?
I would say that the steep slopes policy would definitely address the PUD, for sure.
The steep slopes would address the PUD, but not necessarily this one?
Well, I would say even the RTZ, because it has steep slopes on it, yes, it would address both of them.
Okay.
So that is something to consider. But again, there's clearly, as you know, growing demand for housing. This is one of the few locations where you've got some large tracts of land close to the city. I think for staff, it was making that decision internally without any public review to change the pattern this area. We felt like that was not an appropriate thing to do. So we always default to the conservative things. Think this is going to be really a change for the area. We don't think it's our job to make that call without any kind of a public process. So that's why we kind of lean toward denial on this one.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's a
Thank you,
tough one.
Councilman. John, how far are we off from our steep slopes?
Well, we're hoping to have, well, maybe this is the time to bring it up. We're hoping to have a public hearing on the last Tuesday in September, is what we'd like, but we'll make sure that that's okay with council, if that's something that fits your calendar. That's what we got penciled in, literally just penciled in. We were thinking we would do it at this time period on a Tuesday, where we would present to you all, here's our initial review of some of the issues that we've observed. Here are some potential tools that would address those issues. And again, like this ADU, before we go through a lot of work to develop the tool, we want to make sure that we got some direction from council on which way to go. So that would be the 25th, Tuesday the 25th.
Very good, thank you. I'm seeing no other lights on this case. Let's move on to B, please.
Okay. This is a request to rezone a property from R3 residential zone and R4 special zone to ERA2 zone on 330 Tucker Street, and from R3 residential zone and R4 special zone to ERM3 zone, phew, that's a mouthful, on Tremont Street. To give you some reference, this is the site, well, some people affectionately call the Big Dig, but as you know, it's been open waiting for some infill development for quite some time on Tremont Street. This gives you some photos, again, to show you kind of the different housing types on Tremont Street, looking up and down Tremont. You can see that there is a combination of single-family and multifamily houses along Tremont Street. Again, this just kind of gives you an overview of the development pattern on Tremont. Could you pull that screen down a little bit, please? Zoning, yeah, there you go, that way, perfect, thank you. There's really two different street addresses. There's Tucker, which is you see on the upper portion of the screen that this property fronts, and then there's Tremont Street. Tucker is, although it is zoned R2, it's R3, make sure that's right. R3, thank you. It's still single family in character. The R4 section to the south, it basically faces and fronts along Tremont Street, which has more of a mix. It has both single family and multifamily alongside it. Here is the site plan. And as you look at the site plan, you see that they have 6 units that are proposed to front Tucker Street and 6 units that are proposed to front Tremont Street. Parking is in the rear in both cases. When looking at this request, staff really looked at 2 different aspects of the development, the development that's fronting Tucker Street and the development that's fronting Tremont Street. Okay. And looking at the request, and I'm going to go back to the plan recommendations, if you could move that, adjust that to the middle of the screen, thank you. The plan, the North Shore plan recommends along Tremont Street that there be a medium to high density residential type policy. So that encourages up to 12 units per acre, a maximum of 2 stories along Tremont Street. On Tucker, it recommends urban single-family residential. So again, we're thinking about maintaining that single-family character along Tucker Street. So, and looking at the proposal, I think it's important to note that RM3 zone is a multifamily zone, allows you to do more than 5 units per lot, whereas RA limits you to no more than 4 units per structure. So staff recommends approving RA for the Tucker Street portion because that allows, here, let's see, yeah, thank you. Because that still allows for the 6 units as proposed, but it doesn't create a very intensive zone type for that street. So staff was comfortable with a RA type zone for that portion along Tucker Street, and then RM zone for the portion along Tremont, with a condition limiting the maximum height to 2 stories. So at Planning Commission, let me go back to Planning Commission. At Planning Commission, there was opposition to the request. A lot of the opposition really came from folks living on Tucker Street, the concern about traffic, because it is a narrow street. But once we helped clarify how the property was accessed, it was not going to be accessed off Tucker Street, but off the rear, coming off of Tremont Street. I think it addressed most of their concerns. Planning Commission basically, for the most part, concurred with staff's recommendation, particularly on Tucker Street. The one change for Tremont is they did not have a maximum height requirement, where staff recommended no more than 2 stories or 35 feet. Planning Commission took that requirement out and just required parking to the rear for that situation. So both Planning Commission and staff recommend approve with some modifications and these conditions as noted on your screen.
Very good. I thought I'd see a light from Councilman Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was in a
go back
neighborhood
to the
meeting
site
about,
plan.
actually, I've been in 2 different neighborhood meetings about this, and the plan really does have some compromises that make it, for me, somewhat bearable, and it seemed the residents felt that way too, but I have a question.
Yes, sir.
R4 on Tremont, R3 up on Tucker. That's
Yes.
existing.
Yes.
We've started having these questions about form-based code, and I can certainly see on Tremont how we could probably deal with development better from a form-based code standpoint. But you've kind of jumped up into a neighborhood now with the Tucker Street part and sort of expanded form-based code, at least what I thought was the intention of form-based code when we passed it. How many units would he be allowed in an R3 on Tucker?
I need to do some calculations on that. We can, how about we can get an answer for you before next week? So you want to know kind of, could R3 just work for that site as opposed to RA?
Yeah, versus opening up form-based code, and we're just speaking right now. But
Sure.
Opening up form-based code.
I know there's an issue with
to
setbacks.
Further off, well, yeah, I'd like to know about that. I was gonna be my second question.
I think setbacks will be an issue. Actually, I think RA might be the better tool, but even then, I think you might run into issues with setbacks. I think you'd have to get variances for setbacks.
Okay, so you can give me that information for
Yes,
next
we
week?
will. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions on this item? Very good. Moving on to C, John.
Okay. Okay. This is a request to rezone from R1 residential zone, R2 residential, zone, and C2 convenience commercial zone to an RTZ zone to accommodate a townhouse development. As you see on this screen, this property is located in between, to the rear of the Walmart Center off of Highway 153, Winding Lane to the south, and Grub Road to the north. It's kind of like in this triangle wedge between those 3 developments. You look at the zone, let me go to, again, you can see the rear of Walmart here. You can see what's going on there. This shows you Winding Lane, which is really a single-family residential type street with some new housing infill taking place. Here is the site. As you see, it's currently vacant. Here's another view looking into the site off of Grub Road. And I shot you this so you can get a feel for the development pattern on Grub. You've got some duplexes that do front on the Grub Road. You also got a church across the street, so there's a little bit more of a mix of uses on Grub Road than you do on Winding Lane. The zoning, as you can see, it is a mixed pattern. You have part of the site is zoned commercial, the rest of it is pretty much all zoned R2. You see a little sliver that's zoned R1. Within this area, there hasn't been an approved RTZ zone. And look close nearby, the closest is approximately 1.5 miles. That was approved west along Wild Ginger Trail. So there really hasn't been a precedent for RTZ yet at this location. The Hickson North River Plan recommends low-density residential, but we should note that it notes that townhouses and duplexes may be appropriate if the density is compatible. And that's where, again, we look at the kind of street that the property is on, what's the prevailing development pattern on that street to determine if townhouses or duplexes will be appropriate at a particular location. In this particular site plan, you see that most of the development is accessed off of Grub Road. There was a little bit of miscommunication on a couple of lots. If you see those dashed lines at the very bottom of your page, it says 37 and 38. Those are actually 2 out parcels that actually would be accessing off a Winding Lane. The applicant later modified their site plan to more clearly communicate their intent and showed 3 townhouses, so for a total of 39 townhouses. I think staff's look at this was, again, what street are you accessing off of? What property are you relating to? As it relates to Grub Road, we didn't see an issue with townhouses fronting on Grub Road. Our bigger issue had to do with Winding Lane, because you do have single-family residential along Winding Lane. We recommended at the time, because again, we weren't aware that that was actually part of the...
No.
development at the time. So our recommendation was to approve with no more than 36 residential units, because again, we didn't realize those are out parcel units, and only one curb cut and vehicular access from Grubb Road, and no more than 4 townhouses may be in a single mass building, which is what they're showing here, units of 3s and 4s. So that keeps it broken up so you don't have one wall-to-wall mass of housing. At Planning Commission, there was opposition. Good opposition. If you could center that slide on opposition, thank you. A lot of the concern had to come from residents who were on Winding Lane, concerned about flooding and traffic, and I guess also what the development would mean for their property values. So there were some concerns from residents on Winding Lane at the meeting. However, after hearing from staff and the applicant, they recommended to approve, subject to the following conditions. And the one, probably bullets 1 and 2, the biggest difference is they increased the number from 36 to 39 dwelling units. And they noted that only one curb cut and vehicular access on Grubb Road, except for lots 37, 38, and 39. And those are those 3 lots you saw on the site plan. You see accessing off of Winding Lane. So you would have a curb cut on Winding Lane for those properties to access that property. So a little bit different recommendation from staff and Planning Commission.
Very good. Thank you, John. Chairman Smith.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, sir.
John.
Yes, sir.
Flooding. As with every site plan, I know we put, everybody has to abide by what we have for stormwater.
Yes.
That's really the biggest concern in this particular area. We've already got a lot of issues with Grubb, and as you can see, the 100-year flood right there at Grubb and Winding. I think that's one of the larger concerns. So, for me, it's just a matter of making sure that, the final site plan that's submitted, everything along those lines, that they are going to be holding at least as much water.
Yes, and that's state law as well as city code. You cannot.
I know it's law and code, but I've
Yeah.
got a few places in my district that
I hear you.
lawless and codeless. So, just want to make sure that we're following through with that. I know it's LDO, but
Yes.
that's going to be a big concern for me out there, is that we're following through with that.
Okay.
But otherwise, I'm good. Thanks,
Okay.
John.
Thank you.
Very good. Any other questions or comments on this item? All right. John D., please.
Okay. This is a request to rezone a site from R1 and R3 for basically R1 to R3, I'm sorry, for a multi-unit residential development. At the time, it was 90 units. I think it's been reduced, and I'll cover that in a little bit, but basically 90 residential units for a multifamily. To give you, again, a general location, this is off of Shallowford Road. You have Ashford Place across the street and Shallowford Trace Apartments that immediately abuts this property to the west. The site is currently, again, has several single-family detached residential buildings on it. To the north, you have a religious institution, a medical assisted facility. You've got single-family detached residential to the east. To the south, however, you got multifamily, and to the west, you have multifamily residential. So it's really in this transition between multifamily and single-family. I think it's important to note. All right, let me go to, here's some site. Yeah, here you're getting some pictures of the site. Here, this is Shallowford Road. Again, looking into the site. If you can see the zoning pattern here, you've got the site is surrounded by, well, at least it's bordered with R3 to the west and south. To the north, you have the R4 for an assisted living facility, and to the immediate east, you have R1. This again indicating a site that was site plan or case that was submitted for staff review back in 2017. Just giving you some case history. Staff reviewed this request, and we also recommended approval at the time. It was 255 units at the time, at a density of about 18 dwelling units per acre. It was withdrawn, though, before it became to City Council. The Hamilton Place Community Plan recommends medium density residential at this location, and so that plan recommends that density shall not exceed 8 dwelling units per acre and shall be fee simple to encourage owner occupancy, or that's the current plan recommendation for this site. And just some other important things to note relative to the Hamilton Place plan. Of course, we knew that at Shallowford Road, it was a key focus area of the plan, and it basically noted that given the amount of underutilized, undeveloped land on Shalford Road, east of Gun Barrel Road, it's created more pressure to expand commercial development eastward along Shalford. So trying to come up with some alternative uses other than commercial, which would impact traffic congestion that's already taken place along Shalford Road. And so the idea here was to promote medium and high-density residential that acts as a transition between those commercial uses and the surrounding single-family neighborhoods. Okay. So again, his depicts, you can see the development pattern along the site to the east and south. You have the apartment complexes, which run about 18 to 15 dwelling units per acre. To the neighborhood, the single-family subdivision to the east has a density of about 1.8, quite a contrast, right? So the question is, how do we create transition? And so staff, in reviewing this request, recommended approval subject to limiting that density to no more than 8 dwelling units per acre, which is consistent with the land use plan recommendation. That there'd be no buildings taller than 2 stories within 100 feet of that eastern property line, because that's where you have that neighborhood adjoining the property. So trying to make sure there's not an issue of scale abutting Drake Forest. No dumpster, community clubhouse, or accessory structures located within 100 feet, again, of Drake Forest. And type B landscaping required along the eastern property along Drake Forest. So we're trying to make sure that there's a good buffer transition between this development and Drake Forest to the east. There was opposition at Planning Commission. I say there were several points made. Let me go back to the actual zoning map. I think it's important to show. I think part of the concern among the neighbors was, well, once you rezone this, what's going to happen with that R1 property between it and the road? So the concern is this: if you approve this, what's going to happen with that large R1 next door? So there's some concern about what will happen with that track after this decision is made. I think the other concern was they really want to, again, trying to promote home ownership. The perception, and I'm not going to say fact or not, but the perception out there is that there's too much apartments out there already. So a lot of folks are concerned about property values, is what I heard at the Planning Commission meeting, as well as traffic. So those are all reasons that the residents were opposed to the request. I will note that the developer did reduce the total units by about 10, I think. Let me go back to the recommendation because it reflects that. Basically, reduced it from 90, I think I mentioned, yeah, 90 to 82 units based on feedback from the public. So again, slightly different recommendation from Planning Commission and staff. This did have opposition.
Very good. I'm seeing no lights or questions on this item. This is in my district, but I will reserve comment for the moment.
Okay.
E, please, John.
All right, this is a request to rezone a piece of property. This is off of, oh my gosh, Appleton Pike, right near the interchange with 75 and Appleton Pike. From R1 to C2, an important nuance for this site is it's actually split between the city and the county. This proportion that they're requesting rezone is in the city, and this is for, make sure I get this zoned in right, the rear portion, which is to be used for parking. The front portion is in the county. And so they're asking to rezone the rear portion so they can accommodate surface parking on their property. You can see that we have had several, if y'all familiar with the, what's the name of the fish spot? Fish, I should know that. Larry's Fish. Yeah, Uncle Larry's Fish. That was a recently approved rezoning request not too long ago. So there is some precedent for rezoning to C2, although this is a little deeper than prior rezoning requests, and so that's why staff thought, and looking at this request, we want to be sure that there's not other uses that could create some impacts on some of the adjacent residential properties. Let me go back to the aerial. It's kind of hard to see from this picture, but there is, you can see there's a power line easement running across the back end of this property, and there are some residences on the other side of that power easement. So there are some adjacent residential uses that we need to be sure to protect when thinking about parking or a C2 zone in close proximity to single family. So let me go down here. You can see the plan recommends medium scale commercial at this location. So there is some precedent in terms of policy recommendation from the plan for considering commercial at this location. Again, what we were concerned about was making sure that while you use it for parking, it doesn't become something else that creates an impact on adjacent residential uses. So staff recommended approval subject to the following conditions. Any off-premise signage or billboards are prohibited, and for uses parking, office, and residential only. That way we're ensuring we're maintaining compatibility with those residents in the rear. At Planning Commission, there was no opposition, and Planning Commission concurred with staff that the proposed use would be compatible with adjacent uses and essentially adopted the same conditions that staff recommended.
Very good. Thank you, John. I'm seeing no lights. This one is also in my district, and I have no comments or questions at this time.
Okay?
F, please.
Yes. This is a request to, this is located at the Lee Highway, let me get my streets right. My notes. Silverdale, thank you. Lee Highway Silverdale intersection. This is a request to rezone from R1 residential zone to R3 MD residential moderate density to build fourplexes. And the proposed density, as indicated, is 10 dwelling units per acre. So that's, if you look at the density in the area, it ranges from 3 dwelling units per acre for the single family and 6.5 dwelling units per acre for the duplexes. On the property, as indicated, is located at 2805 Silverdale Road, north of the Tyner Road and Lee Highway intersection. The property, as you can see here, is currently vacant. And again, it has a, and this is an important nuance, again, looking at what streets it fronts on. If you look along Silverdale Road, immediately adjacent to the property to the east, is that right, turn right? That'd be east and north. I guess that's east. North, well, I'm looking, I guess, north of the site, there's single-family residential, large tract single-family residential. There is a mixed-use residential development further to the north, but it's predominantly, I say immediately adjacent to this property is single-family residential. You do have along, let me go, here you can see the street that we're talking about, what this property would address, where you have some residential on both sides of Silverdale Road. This probably gives you a better indication of the use pattern. You can see here again the vacant lot. Immediately to the north, you have single-family residential. You do have one R4 zone much further to the north from this property, but for the most part, this entire area is zoned R1. You do have some commercial at the intersection of Lee Highway and Tyner. And I'm going to show you the site plan here in a second. If you look at this site plan, you can see they're proposing to have one curb cut with 3 fourplexes located with a hammerhead turnaround in the back. That's a clear departure from the residential development pattern along this street. I'm going to go back to the zoning. Actually, let me talk about the plan first. The plan, the Shalford Lee Highway plan recommends single-unit residential for this site. So it's clearly about maintaining the R1 residential zone for this area. However, again, if you look at the zoning, back to the zoning. Where is it? Am I going the wrong way, aren't I? Here we go. If you look at the zoning, clearly with commercial on 3 of the 4 intersections, right? You see that to the south. There could be the potential that this becomes something else. However, as it's currently configured, this property would be accessed off of Silverdale Road. So we think that would have an impact on those residential properties on Silverdale Road. If it were consolidated with the properties to the south and accessed off Tyner, that would be another thing. Do y'all have any questions about that aspect? I'll make sure we're clear from staff on that. So we don't, if it was consolidated where you incorporate those properties to the south off Tyner Road, you might look at something other than single family. But the way they've got it configured where it's accessing off of Silverdale Road, it would immediately abut these single-family residences. Staff had concerns about this. We recommended denial. At Planning Commission, there was opposition. They concurred with staff's recommendation to deny. And I'll hush.
I have a feeling I'm going to see a light any second.
Yeah, well,
now.
planning recommended to deny it too. Everybody recommended to deny it.
Very good.
And that's what I'm going to do.
Very good. We will move forward then. John, we have 2 amendments.
Yes, the first is deals with an amendment to the C4, And what I like for council with their discretion is to actually defer action on this 1 week. We have a little bit more cleanup to do on the ordinance language. And we'll come back to y'all again once that's cleaned up. But I would recommend deferring it a week until we can tweak the order. But I'll just give you a general overview of that. Essentially, it creates a special permit process in a C4 zone. If somebody wanted to build a taller structure, there'd be a public process for considering that. That's all it's doing. It's for C4, which is a planned commercial zone. Most of your shopping malls, your major shopping malls have that. Northgate has it. Hamilton Place has it. So this is just creating a tool, a review process for considering a height over a certain amount.
Very good. Thanks, John. We'll look forward to that. Our last amendment, well, before we get into our special permits,
I think that's
H,
on you.
and I'm going to actually, if you don't
That's for
mind,
you
we'll
guys.
let our city attorney kind of brief us on this and the background. Phil, you want to fill us in, Phil?
I will fill you in here. Currently, we have in our city code provisions that have prohibited the operation of coin-operated devices in family amusement centers for a number of years unless someone actually had a special permit or a license from the city. We checked and made sure how many of these folks we would be affecting concerning our ordinance, and we have had no one who has actually had one of these for a number of years. Because of that, we questioned whether we actually needed these sections in the code here. This would regulate anyone that would have the ability to be able to have a video game or a pinball machine in locations in the city without a license. We thought that some of those provisions have been somewhat outdated since Sega Genesis came into effect, and we thought maybe we needed to go into a different ruling. So those sections are recommended by our office to be removed from the code here at this point in time. If we have any other issues in connection with dealing with establishments that operate them, we'll deal with them in the future.
Thank you, Phil. I'm not seeing any lights or questions about this item. We did cover this in our strategic planning session last week, and we had our questions, I think, taken care of there. I think this is a pretty self-explanatory, and if there's no other questions, then we will move on from this item into our special permits. Again, do we need to go over these? Yeah. Do we need to read them out? Okay. Will you please read these into the record for me, please, Karen?
A resolution approving a special exceptions permit for an existing liquor store change in ownership located at 600 Manufacturers Road.
G, please.
A resolution approving a special exceptions permit for an existing liquor store change in ownership located at 5012 Highway 58, Suite 108.
H.
A resolution approving a special exceptions permit for an existing liquor store change in ownership located at 2001 Market Street.
Very good. Thank you. Does anybody else have any business they'd like to bring before? Councilman Mitchell. Yes, sir, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, it might be you, Phil, but I'd like John to hear the conversation. While we're waiting on steep slopes, stormwater runoff, et cetera, we continue to move forward with things. What are your thoughts, Phil, and John for that matter, on creating conditions that may make mandatory professional services on zoning? Is that legal? Is that, and I'll tell you what I'm thinking about. A lot of times when we're doing residential construction, I don't see a geotech engineer involved and on steep slope and things like that. And I'm wondering, is it legal if we were to begin to put, until we get something done about steep slopes, stormwater runoff, is it legal to require licensed geotech engineers to be a condition on approval of zoning?
Well, we currently have to deal with issues that are, I guess, concerns that would require a variance on a lot that would be involved if there is an issue that would be, restricting the building ability of a location. I think we can require, at least requirements that they have a licensed person provide a site plan, clearly, that we would use in connection with something if there is a specific slope. But you would have to define what that slope is that you have a concern over. You would also have to make sure that that structure would be able to stay on that slope based upon how difficult it is to build on it there. So those are the types of things I think that are site-specific, but you do need to have its parameters of where you would be determining that they would kick in. And
So as
obviously, that's for the health and safety of the adjoining property owners and the
Right.
people down the hill from them.
All right, so as long as we had those parameters defined, it would be legal for the council to consider a condition like that.
I believe so, yes, sir.
Over 3-1?
Just have one other thought too, just another option along that path. It might be worth also talking to LDO to see within what their current code parameters, they may be able to do that anyway without, I learned some things through this process about things they're already doing now that they didn't need code changes or conditions. So my only suggested potential amendment, same outcome, but maybe a different process, is that maybe part of LDO's standard operating procedure in terms of, with this situation, we just need this type of information to be able to get you a permit.
But I'm not sure that our purview is to
Okay.
create standard operational procedures for the administration, so.
I got you. I'm just offering that as a, I mean, my only call, I just want to be sure that it's a zoning-related thing. So we just got to make sure we can connect that to zoning. That's the only thing, we need to make sure we connect that dot.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Does that take care of everything else the council would like to address during this Planning and Zoning Committee meeting? If so, I will adjourn us till 6.